Hello and welcome to another episode of Magicians Only. Are you a magician? Should you be listening to this? That's all right. Everyone is welcome. We are going to discuss some secrets over the course of this podcast series, but mainly we're going to be talking about, entertainment. So this could be entertainers only. This is about the journey. It's about the craft of any kind of entertainment, really, or really following your dreams. So we're going to be I'm going to be discussing the adventures I've had in my life as an entertainer. Occasionally I might interview friends of mine who have insane stories. We might delve into magic for the past, magic of the future, where magic is going, and even talk about, some pretty great secrets and how and where you can learn. Speaking of, don't forget that Magicians Only is sponsored by magiconthego.com and gives you 1,000 tricks in your pocket, 1,000 videos. That's card tricks, coin tricks, stage, stand-up, lectures, interviews, the history of magic, antique magic, future magic, you name it. It's all here on the app. It's everything you could ever want or need if you want to learn about magic. If you are a magician, it gives you material and ideas to improve your shows. It's really an incredible resource. Essentially, Magic on the Go is an encyclopedia of magic in your pocket. So check it out now. Right, let's get on to the episode. Before we start, actually, I want to have a conversation with you all about what this podcast is and the type of material and the type of things that we're going to be talking about. This is a very adult podcast. It's no holds barred, everybody, okay? So I want to warn you right now. So if you're easily offended, and for God's sake, get a life if you are, but if you're easily offended, this isn't for you. If you wake up in the morning and expect everyone to live their life like they're in a Disney movie, it isn't for you, okay? If you're so woke that you can't sleep, it isn't for you. This is real. It's going to be raw. We're going to talk about some real shit. There's going to be language. There's going to be sexual situations. There's going to be truth. So if you don't want to hear that, and this is not for you, okay? But I do hope that those of you who stick around, I can tell you one thing. I can make you a promise that you're going to have a laugh. You're going to be entertained. You're going to be hopefully inspired. You're going to learn from my mistakes, and trust me, there's a lot. And over the course of telling you my nutty stories, hopefully you'll be forewarned and forearmed, really, because that's what I want to do. I want to share these ideas with you. I want to share these adventures with you. I want to express just how happy I am to still be alive after some of the insane decisions I made in my life, which we will get to eventually, because, life is wonderful, but it can also be quite dangerous. So it's good to know the things to look out for. So we're going to start with a very simple topic, which is one that I get asked all the time, and that is, what got you into magic? Well, let's think about this for a second. It was the old box of tricks. I was kind of into it when I was about 6 years old, 5 or 6. My parents had got me a little, actually it was a really weird story. My mum had joined this thing called a catalogue club. And in those days, in order to join a catalogue club, and what she would do is she would try and get other people to buy from the catalogue using her as the vendor, essentially, so that she would get a commission on all the stuff. But in order to join the catalogue club, pyramid sales being what they are, she actually had to buy some things as well. And so she brought my sister, who's 3 years older than me, so she was about 10. She brought my sister a science kit. She brought my brother some toy soldiers, and she brought me a magic set. And I remember I couldn't really read the instructions too well on the magic set, but it had like a little felt hat and a moustache that you glued on, and it was like a little magic show, really, in a cloak. And I learned my first marketing lesson from this magic set, which was that I was going to do a show in my garage, and so I got the whole thing set up where I had sweets and candy for everybody when they showed up. We put a carpet down in the garage. I had all the tricks that were in this magic set all set up. And then I needed to let everyone know about it. So I asked a friend of mine if he would tell everybody. That was the extent of marketing. I was like, could you let everyone know that I'm doing a magic show? And obviously, he's 5, he's 6, he didn't. And no one showed up. And to say that was psychologically traumatic for me for many years after would be an understatement. But yes, and I have to admit, I haven't got much better at marketing. But I'm trying, I'm learning. And now I tell a lot of people to tell their friends. And I'm telling you, tell your friends about stevevalentine.com. Tell your friends about magiconthego.com. Tell your friends about Steve Valentine Live to check out the schedule and see where we're performing. And tell your friends about this insane podcast, Magicians Only, because it's going to get real in a minute. But anyway, yeah, that was a great marketing lesson for moi. But anyway, so what that did was kind of put me off the whole idea of doing magic, and I wasn't. I don't know. I just kind of went on to other things, playing cowboys or whatever, and this thing happened. So I'm going to get a bit personal here, you see. So the magic set that really got me into magic was a hanky-panky number 3 magic set. Now this was the bee's knees. This was the deluxe edition. This one came with jumbo cards and everything. And it really felt like a professional magician's kit. And we all get those quite often. That is how a magician will get inspired to become a magician. But it was the reason that I got the magic set was really, for want of a better term, fucked up. So I'm about 6, 7 years old. And so for those who don't know, so when you're a boy, your testicles drop. Okay. I was 6 or 7, and one of my testicles hadn't dropped, right? So I was blithely, living life with one ball, having a ball, as they say, not knowing anything that was going on. And so my parents informed me that I'm going to have to go into the hospital to have this surgery. Actually, it wasn't my parents who informed me, it was this doctor, and I'll never forget his office. It was always freezing cold, and his hands were freezing cold every time he had to check me. There you go, national health. They can't afford a heater. But so I'm told that I have to go in and we have to have this surgery in order to sew, to reach up and find out where it is and then sew it back down. And for want of a better term. So I'm not really understanding what's going on. All I know is suddenly I'm spending a couple of days in the hospital. And this was the days of national health where I've got to admit the nurses were a bit abrupt. They were a bit harsh. And it may have been because it was a kids' ward and maybe the kids were all playing up. I don't know. But it wasn't a pleasant experience. But I remember going in for the surgery. And when I came out of the surgery, I had this huge metal wire frame over my midsection, and the blanket was over that. And I remember coming to, and then I looked down at the bandaged area, and what the doctors had decided to do, because it was quite common at that point, and I still don't have clarity on whether my parents knew about this or not, but they decided to circumcise me while I was under, because, why the fuck not? Bring down one of his balls and let's circumcise him at the same time. So no one told me about this. So the first thing I remember thinking was that they chopped it off, and it was painful. There's a reason that this is done with young babies, because it was excruciating, and I was crying, I was freaking out. My parents were there. I just thought they completely disfigured me, and they felt so guilty that they bought me the greatest magic set that was available at the time. It was expensive. I'm pretty sure that it was the guilt was the reason why they bought it for me, and it helped a lot. And also having that wire frame as well was cool, because I could lay the cards out on it, and so there you go. So it actually did the job. It made me feel a little bit better. But I do remember going to school a week or so later, and it was very sore and very painful. And I remember my brother telling everybody about it. And thank you, Paul. and I was picked on for many years for that. Anyway, that's the story of how I got into magic. So, I warned you. I did tell you. We're adults. We're adults here, and this is life is real. Okay. Oh, right. So moving on. I'm going to have a little sip of my coffee here. Having told you that story, which I've only ever told one other person before, I want to tell you about my experiences in Yugoslavia as a magician, because in the 80s, I got an opportunity to essentially run a nightclub in the former Yugoslavia. Tourism was booming, and they wanted to have entertainment for English-speaking tourists. And so there was a company called Yugo Tours that decided to pay for these nightclubs to be put into all these different hotels, and it was advertising for Yugo Tours as well, because it was sponsored by Yugo Tours, and the idea also for the hotel was to keep the customer inside the hotel so that they would spend their money on the booze and the food inside the hotel, right? So it was kind of a win-win. I'd been in this weird situation where I'd had a day job working at a department store called Keddies in Southend-on-Sea, and I'd been kind of tossed around from department to department, and currently I was in the menswear department, and I was having a horrible time because I'll never forget, because one of the senior salespeople, he just kept stealing my commission sales. Every time I get to about selling it, he'd send me to the stock room to get something, and then he'd take the sale over. And I remember yelling at him. I was about 18, 19, and I remember just going off at him. And because of that, I got a warning from HR. I think HR was a little different back then than it is today, because the idea of stealing my commission was and he got away with it because he was a, quote, senior salesperson. As you can tell, I still haven't got over it. But I was very angry, and I wanted to quit, but I was trying to keep the job because I needed a little extra money. I was trying to find places to do my magic shows, and it was tough because I didn't have a video of my act, and I thought maybe if I can save up for a video recorder, I can film the act and then send that to an agent and then maybe get some more gigs. But those gigs were few and far between, so I needed my day job. And so the day job was working at Keddies. And I had this amazing thing happen that happens once in a lifetime, and I'm sure you guys can appreciate this. So essentially, here I am. I'm having a horrible time. This guy's stealing my money, and I can't do anything about it. And I see an ad in the Stage newspaper, the Stage being the variety newspaper of England, and in the back of it, and it said they were looking for variety acts for work abroad. And so I reached out, I called, and got an appointment to meet with this guy. His name was Jeff Brown, I think. And I met him at this really dingy-looking kind of travel agent on travel agency office on Regent Street, I want to say it was. And it did feel a bit dodgy. We just went in the back room. I had magic with me, but he didn't want to see anything. Basically, we had a little quick conversation, and I told him the kind of stuff I would do, and he asked me what my experience was. And I had the year, about just over a year or so earlier, done a season as a redcoat at Butlins, which is like a holiday camp thing. So I was able to say I was on the entertainment staff at Butlins. I know how to do all the games, the Miss Legs competition, or the Mr. Hairy Chest competition, or drinking competitions, or sing-alongs, as well as doing my magic. And he said, that's good, because what you're going to do, he says, is you're going to get to run this club, he said, and you have to do 2 20-minute spots a night for 12 different nights. He said, I don't care what you do. He said, you could do like a Miss Lovely Legs and a magic show, or you could do like some kind of a game where you're passing oranges underneath the chins. It doesn't really matter. He says, I'm going to send you t-shirts, hats. You're going to be able to give those as well as bottles of wine as prizes to the customers in this nightclub. And that's what you're going to do. And then at the end of the night, you're going to DJ until about 2 or 3 in the morning. And I knew nothing about any of this, really, DJing especially. But in those days, of course, DJing was more like... And now, here's Whitney Houston. It was more like that, really, than anything else. And so I remember getting a letter. So we had the meeting, and he said he would let me know. And I got a letter one morning saying that I got the job. And I would be flying, in 2 weeks, I would be flying out to a place called Baška Voda in Dalmatia, in Croatia. And I would start my tenure as a live-in entertainer. And I saw this as a way I saw this as a way of learning my craft. I thought it was a perfect place to take all my tricks, all the routines that I've wanted to learn, to get up on stage every night and to try them. It didn't matter if I was going to fail because, I was in the middle of Croatia, so I could experiment. And this was my dream. I feel bad for performers nowadays because there is nowhere to fail. There's nowhere safe to fuck up, because if you do screw up, you're going to end up on YouTube and they're going to make a meme out of you. Trust me. So, but this was amazing. And this was 1986, 87. So I had this letter saying that I had the job. And I remember going into work and thinking about how I was going to let them know that I quit. And I got called into HR, and HR said to me, we're going to have to let you go because, you had another fight with the guy, the salesperson, and it's not appropriate behavior. And I told them exactly what I thought about them. And I said, actually, I was going to quit. And she's like, really? I said, yeah, have a look at this. And I'll never forget, I reached in my back pocket, I pulled out the letter, and I had a brochure showing where I was going to go. And I said, I'm actually going to be going here in 2 weeks. And it was her face, this mean woman who had been so nasty to me. And here she was. I was like, I'm going to go live in Yugoslavia in the sun and entertain people for a living. And you're going to be stuck here in a dingy little room in Keddy's department store. Good luck. It was one of those great moments in history that happen in our lives once in a while, where the stars align and you get to have a literal finger. You get to give a literal finger to authority. And I was off. It was it. This was it. This was it. I was off to Yugoslavia. All right. Part 2 of the Yugoslavia adventure will be in next week's episode. Right now, we are going to do a little bit of a segment I like to call Past Masters. Past Masters. Past Masters is not as boring as it sounds. Basically, it's some really messed up stuff or awesome stuff that I find in magazines, books, and articles from the past that is just as relevant today as it was back then, which is kind of scary and actually a little bit sad. So this next segment, I'm going to read to you. If you're a real magic nerd, and what you've got to do is you've got to guess who wrote this. But I actually find that the topic of this particular article was fascinating. It has to do with stooges, really. A lot of people, a lot of audience members believe that magicians use stooges. And honestly, for those who are just kind of interested in magic, let me tell you, the magicians really don't use stooges. We don't have to anymore. The techniques and the methods that are available to us enable magicians to get away with stuff without paying someone to help us along the way. Truthfully, I'm telling you right now, it's not only is it looked down upon within the magic community, but also where's the fun in that? What's the point of going on stage to do magic and trying to get away with something and having fun with the audience and living on the, like bouncing around on your toes, trying to fool everybody and get away with stuff if you've already got it stooged up? That's just so lame. So no, we don't use stooges. But that wasn't always the case, especially in Europe. And because this article deals with Europe, I think it kind of fits perfectly into today's episode. Past Masters. Oh, you guys, this is such a brilliant article. You're gonna you're gonna love this. So the article is called Confederacy. Confederacy being another term that magicians use for stooges, confederates, people who are secretly part of the organization, they're in on the secret. But this article, and again, if you're a nerd, magic nerd, and as I am, to see if you can figure out from the style of writing, who might have written this. Here we go. A few years ago, when in Genoa, in Italy, I came across a wonderful man who raised Confederacy almost to the rank of a fine art. He used no fewer than 40 accomplices in the course of his thought-reading experiments, which was of 2 hours duration. His name, and forgive me if I get this wrong, guys, his name was Il Cavaliere Gabrielli. And although every experiment was a pure fake, he succeeded in convincing a well-known traveling magician that he was a genuine clairvoyant. Naturally, it would never occur to a simple-minded conjurer of Nordic race that any performer would go to the extent of employing a small army of plants in order to mystify an unsuspecting audience. It should be mentioned that it's easier to obtain this sort of assistance in southern European countries and in Latin America than in the lands of Anglo-Saxon speech. In the former regions, the claque, in other words, a body of men and women paid to attend public performances for the sole purpose of applauding the artists, is still in full force. To secure public appreciation of his efforts, all that a performer has to do is to make application to the head of the local syndicate, who will provide any number of enthusiastic auditors at a per capita rate. When the Italian opera company visits South America, the manager carries a small claque of his own. These individuals, themselves fairly good musicians, give the cue to the members of the local corporation as to when to applaud. And this is essential, as it would be disastrous if applause occurred at the wrong time. At the close of every performance, a prolonged and noisy manifestation takes place, the vast majority of the audience joining in owing to the power of mental suggestion. Can I just say, before we read any further, isn't that just fucking awesome? What a great idea. I mean, I know that in sitcom we have these signs above the audience that tell them when to clap. And I guess it's a little bit like that. You're turning them into this laugh track sometimes, or applause, or and you're turning them into kind of stooges, like sitcom stooges. But this whole idea of a claque, I had no idea this existed. Anyway, let's get back to the piece. All artists, including magicians, employ the claque in countries where it's still in vogue. If they did not do so, the members of the syndicate would probably attend the opening performance and give the company the bird, thereby ruining the theatre's business for the whole week. Now, the claque is often engaged by unscrupulous musical managers to hiss and boo a performer. Now, the working of this contemptible swindle is as follows. A well-known foreign artist, most likely a vocalist or a musician, is engaged for 2 or 3 months at a very tempting salary, about twice as much as he's ever received in his own country. But there is a clause in the agreement that in the event of the artist's effort not meeting with public appreciation, the manager has the right to cancel the contract. Now, in most cases, a good artist, confident of his ability, will accept the stipulation. The newly arrived star is billed like a circus. That's B-I-L-L-E-D, not B-U-I-L-D, by the way, just so you know. So the newly arrived star is billed like a circus, but meets with such a bad reception on the first night that the curtain has to be rung down. The director immediately rushes to the artist's dressing room and informs him that, much to his regret, he must cancel the contract. Having paid the performer for one night, he departs, loudly lamenting the money he's lost in advertising and almost in tears when he thinks of the discredit that has been brought on his establishment. The next morning, the assistant manager, a kind and gentle man, calls at the hotel of the now low-spirited artist, tells him how sorry he is, and promises to do his very best to induce the director to reconsider his decision. Usually, the upshot of the matter is that a new contract is signed, this time for a bare living wage. The performer is almost bound to acquiesce, not only for the sake of the money, but in order to save his reputation. Obviously, it would be very harmful for him if it were to get about in countries where he's known that he had been a miserable failure abroad. Inspired articles suddenly appear in all the local papers to the effect that a crowd of ruffians paid by a jealous rival created a disturbance at last night's performance, but that the great so-and-so will fulfill his engagement as previously announced. In this way, good publicity is obtained and an apparent échec is turned to account. At subsequent performances, the artist meets with great success, due in part to his own talent and in part to the efforts of the claque, the same men who drove him off the stage on the first night. After 2 or 3 weeks, the now illustrious top liner is sublet, in according with a clause in the contract, to other theatres in the vicinity. The salaries paid by the provincial managements might be 10 times that which the unfortunate foreigner is getting, but on his return to the old country, he will be ashamed to confess, even to his most intimate friends, that his salary was reduced. On the contrary, he will proudly display his original contract, which, being valueless, he was allowed to retain, and assure all of his acquaintances that he had the most wonderful time. And that, gentlemen, is exactly how the little game goes on without the slightest fear of exposure. The moral is obvious. Always delete the cancellation clause. In conclusion, it may be well to point out that the cancellation clause is never inserted in contracts offered to artists of worldwide repute, such as Grok, for example, but only in those of the near great. This trick is seldom, if ever, attempted with a small performer. It is not worthwhile. Past Masters! Well, there you have it. Holy crap. Did you even know about the clack? I didn't know about the clack, but it makes perfect sense. But then, not just the clack, but taking it to a whole nother level, this idea of then subletting the artist out to other theatres for making so much money. And the only reason that this never gets exposed is because of the ego. Oh my God, it's our ego of the musicians, the comedians, the magicians, the actors, the artists. Our ego gets in the way every single time. If one person had come back to, say, to England and had a newspaper article saying how he was taken advantage of, then he could have saved a lot of people a lot of embarrassment. This whole idea of subletting the artist is actually kind of reminds me of the old studio system when actors were under contract. It was bullshit then and it's bullshit now. So yes, magicians have used stooges in the past in order to fluff a trick, shall we say, to make it a little better, a little greater. Really doesn't happen anymore. But who knew that stooges could be used to destroy a performance or to make a performance seem incredible? It certainly explains some of the shows I've seen in recent years. By the way, dear magic nerds, did you guess the author of that article? It was a chap by the name of Victor Ferrelli. And Ferrelli is an interesting geezer, to be honest with you. He's a character from the past who wrote a number of books and some really good stuff, but also some material that drove me a little crazy because it wasn't accurate, such as the Leipzig Cards Across and Cards to Pocket stuff that he wrote. And the Card Stab. He wrote a whole manuscript on Nate Leipzig's Card Stab, something I deal with in detail on Magic on the Go, but included some pretty erroneous kind of BS methods. That said, he's an interesting character. He was born in Dublin in Ireland and he was a student of David Devant. He became kind of an expert card and close-up magician, but he was very superstitious. He wouldn't let himself be photographed, so we have very few pictures of him, which is somewhat fascinating. He did write some really great stuff that I think we should all be studying as magicians, or if you want to get into magic, I highly recommend you get some of his books. He wrote a book called The Mystic Seven. He had a method for doing the spelling card trick called the Master Speller that was actually really, really good. He wrote one of the best books on the linking rings. It was called The Odin Rings, which was kind of detailing the method of a chap called Claudius Odin in like 1928. But he wrote a lot of stuff. He wrote Controlled Coincidence, Ferrelli's Card Magic, and Lend Me Your Pack. 2 books. If you can get hold of them, and I think they're still available on PDF online, that's with an F, Ferrelli's Card Magic and Lend Me Your Pack. Really, really good books on card stuff. He wrote the Leipzig thing called Thanks to Leipzig, and he wrote John Ramsey's Routine with the Cups and Balls and the Triple Restoration, which John Ramsey was a magician who was an expert in a sleight of hand and misdirection. However, people really say that his Triple Restoration paper trick is amazing. It's not. It's one of the most confusing pieces of shit out there, but it's a perfect example of the king has no clothes when it comes to magic. Don't get me wrong. John Ramsey was amazing, but that particular trick was not. There is a memoir, which I have yet to read, written by Paul Gordon in 2006, called A Magical Memoir, Victor Ferrelli, and I think that might be fun to read. Anyway, he wrote a lot of articles for a lot of magicians. I appreciate the time and love that he gave to magic. And this particular article, because he traveled a lot through Europe, I think this particular article is just a gem, and I really wanted to share it with you. Okay, guys, that's it for now. Check out the next episode where we'll be continuing this Yugoslavian adventure. Until then, I'll see you on the inside. This has been another episode of Magicians Only, sponsored by Magic on the Go at magiconthego.com. Astonish anywhere, anytime.